Millionaire took his mistress on a Babymoon meant for his pregnant wife. The wife took his empire. Instead, they say some secrets are too ugly to stay hidden, and for millionaire businessman Marcus Donovan, that secret was about to explode in the middle of a picture-perfect life with his pregnant wife. Eleanor rumors started swirling. Another woman. Juliana was seen on a luxurious Babymoon trip in the Mediterranean. But it was no innocent coincidence. That trip had been planned for Eleanor. If only she knew how her world was about to change forever, or how she would rise like a phoenix from the ashes of betrayal to snatch the empire that Marcus believed was his alone. This is a twisted tale of karma's grand design. From the outside looking in, Marcus Donovan appeared to have every advantage. Born into a modest but loving family in the suburbs of Baltimore, he was raised by two hard-working parents who always pushed him to chase his dreams. His father, Gregory Donovan, labored at a local construction firm, while his mother, Martha Donovan, balanced two jobs as a part-time librarian and a seamstress. Despite their limited means, they poured every last drop of their energy into their only child's future. Marcus grew up witnessing their relentless dedication to forging a better life, and it shaped him into a man determined to succeed, no matter the cost. By the time he was in college at the University of Pennsylvania, majoring in business administration, Marcus was already known for his unmatched ambition. He interned at Anderson & Crowley, a well-regarded investment firm, where he had a knack for impressing powerful executives. They saw him not just as a bright mind, but as someone who could influence others with his charm. He had a disarming smile, a smooth voice, and a razor-sharp intellect. Everyone predicted his meteoric rise. It felt inevitable. It was during a university networking event that he met Eleanor Taylor, a graduate student in art history who was volunteering for the fundraiser. What started as a brief conversation about Renaissance art blossomed into an unanticipated bond. Eleanor's kind, unassuming spirit and genuine curiosity about life and culture captivated Marcus in ways he never experienced before. She came from a quiet, artistic family. Her mother, Lucinda Taylor, was a painter, and her father, Robert Taylor, taught music at a conservatory. Unlike Marcus's intense drive for business success, Eleanor dreamed of opening a small gallery to showcase her mother's and other emerging artists' work. Although their pursuits were seemingly dissimilar, the synergy between them was magnetic. Marcus loved that Eleanor's perspective gave him a refuge from the relentless hustle of his business environment. She, in turn, admired his ambition and believed in his potential to do great things. He gave her the confidence to dream bigger. She gave him the humility to remember that riches went far beyond what sat in a bank account. For a while, the relationship was pure bliss. Late-night study sessions, peppered with stolen kisses in the university library, romantic walks through Philadelphia's cobblestone streets, and unwavering support in each other's endeavors. Even as Marcus was pulled deeper into the world of high-stakes finance, he managed to carve out time for Eleanor. He promised her a future that glowed with love and adventure. "I'll give you the world," he would say, sealing it with a spontaneous weekend trip to some quaint bed and breakfast. Eleanor, an idealist at heart, believed in his vow wholeheartedly. When he proposed getting down on one knee in front of 100 flickering candles at her favorite local art gallery, she couldn't say yes fast enough. Their wedding in upstate New York was attended by family close friends and a smattering of powerful business connections that Marcus had made. It seemed like the start of a dream that would only grow more vibrant with time. But with the passage of years, the dream changed shape. As Marcus soared in his career, starting Donovan Capital Ventures and establishing connections with Silicon Valley elites, Wall Street executives, and international investors, the simple joys of everyday life slipped out of his reach. He and Eleanor were still deeply in love, but their time together dwindled. Business dinners, conferences, and networking events took precedence. Eleanor struggled with the sense that she was losing the man she had pledged her life to, though she tried her best to stay supportive. She started hosting art events to keep herself busy and to offer a platform for her mother's work. Yet she always tried to leave the front porch light on, hoping Marcus would come home early and remind her they were still the same people who once found refuge in each other's arms. Behind the polished veneer of success, cracks were forming cracks that wouldn't show themselves until life took a dramatic, life-altering turn. A year into their new life of glittering galas and high roller gatherings, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. She told Marcus one morning as he was rushing to finalize a major overseas deal. He was halfway out the door, coffee in one hand and a phone pressed to his ear, when she pulled him aside, eyes brimming with an anxious excitement. "Marcus," she said softly, "I'm pregnant." The moment froze. The phone call, the multi-million-dollar contract, waiting the business world swirling around him, it all faded. In that second, it was just him, Eleanor, and the promise of new life. He lifted her into his arms, tears of joy reflecting in both of their eyes. For the first time in a long time, the tension of business deals, deadlines, and responsibilities melted away. Life felt simple and hopeful again. Eleanor was 3 months pregnant when they decided to host a celebratory dinner at an upscale restaurant called the Redwood Lounge in Manhattan. They reserved a private room and invited their closest circle of friends and family, Marcus's parents. Gregory and Martha were there, beaming with pride. Eleanor's parents, Lucinda and Robert, were equally ecstatic. Champagne flowed, though Eleanor stuck to her sparkling grape juice. Amid toasts and laughter, Marcus promised again he would step back from the intensity of his schedule and be there for his growing family. He asked everyone to raise a glass and said, "To our unborn child and to the bright future we'll share." A wave of applause and cheers filled the room. In the weeks that followed, life felt like it was returning to that earlier state of bliss. Marcus took Eleanor to her doctor's appointments. He'd spend Saturdays helping her organize the spare room in their penthouse into a nursery. He even started thinking about a Babymoon, a pre-birth vacation for them to unwind and connect before the baby arrived. Eleanor's face lit up when he proposed 2 weeks in the south of France. It was a grand romantic gesture that made her hopeful they were truly turning a corner. But the closer they got to finalizing the trip dates, the more frequently those old habits crept in. Marcus would be called away on urgent business, or else he'd lock himself in his home office for hours glued to conference calls with Hong Kong investors. His free time evaporated again. Eleanor worried that if this was the pattern before the baby even arrived, how would he adjust once a newborn demanded all their attention and energy? Nonetheless, she kept faith. She knew business deals could be unpredictable, especially when millions of dollars were at stake. She rationalized, "He's doing this for us. He wants to secure our future. He'll be there when it matters most." It was a mantra she repeated each night, even as she felt the creeping loneliness that threatened to overshadow what should have been the happiest time of her life. Marcus, on the other hand, juggled overwhelming stress from multiple fronts. Donovan Capital Ventures was in a prime expansion phase, and missing crucial deals could mean losing the momentum he'd built over a decade. He justified each missed doctor's appointment and each cancelled dinner by telling himself that once the deals were sealed, he'd have the money and reputation to provide a life of comfort, no luxury for Eleanor and their child. So he pushed on day after day, fueling himself with ambition and adrenaline, hardly noticing that he was accelerating toward a moral precipice. As Donovan Capital Ventures expanded, Marcus came into contact with an even wider circle of corporate bigwigs, international deal-makers and socialites. One such acquaintance was Lawrence Chen, an influential tech magnate who had a flair for elaborate parties. Through Lawrence, Marcus found himself invited to exclusive yacht soirees on the Mediterranean high-stakes poker nights in Macau and lavish ski trips in the Swiss Alps. All these gatherings promised not only entertainment, but also a direct line to the world's wealthiest decision-makers. It was at one of Lawrence's high-profile events that Marcus first encountered Giuliana Moretti. She was an Italian-Brazilian heiress with a well-known family name, rumored to be an aspiring fashion designer, tall and poised with a graceful yet predatory air. She was the kind of woman who seemed to float through a room, drawing every eye. Her conversation was as sharp as her appearance. She'd spent her youth studying in the finest boarding schools in Europe, and she spoke 4 languages fluently. She seemed genuinely intrigued by Marcus's success story, or at least that's how she presented herself. He first noticed her at a New York charity gala, swirling her champagne and laughing with a group of media moguls. Their eyes locked, and for a brief moment, Marcus felt that old spark of curiosity. She was mesmerizing in a way that was impossible to ignore. After a polite introduction, they engaged in small talk about the charity's mission. Within minutes, they pivoted to more personal topics: her upcoming fashion line, his global expansion strategies, her travels across Asia. Giuliana lavished him with compliments that flattered not just his ego, but the deeper part of him that felt underappreciated and overstretched. She seemed to understand the pressures he was under, empathizing with the burden of steering a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Although he told himself it was harmless, Marcus began inviting Giuliana to smaller get-togethers with key investors. He valued her social acumen and thought she could help lubricate business discussions with her grace and wit. One dinner turned into another. Soon casual texts about upcoming events drifted into more personal territory. Giuliana was skilled at emotional lure, often sending messages late at night when Marcus's defenses were down. "I'm thinking of you. Hope you're getting some rest." Or, "You looked so stressed today. Remember to take care of yourself." Her words ignited a feeling of being seen and validated in a way he hadn't felt for months. The lines blurred so subtly that Marcus wasn't sure when their professional rapport shifted into a personal affair. Perhaps it was the night they attended an after-party in Monaco, where the champagne never stopped flowing, the music pulsed till dawn, and everyone else seemed consumed by their own indulgences. In a moment of disoriented excitement, Marcus found himself alone on a balcony with Giuliana. The moon glistened on the sea below, and her perfume swirled around him like an intoxicating promise. Before he fully comprehended, they were locked in a passionate kiss. The guilt that followed was profound, yet not enough to halt what they had begun. He told himself it was a one-time slip. However, the affair continued clandestine, but thrilling, fueling him with a sense of danger and novelty that overshadowed the moral voice within. Each time he returned home to Eleanor, who was by then visibly pregnant and glowing with maternal radiance, he felt a dual wave of shame and heartbreak. He still loved Eleanor, or so he claimed, yet he couldn't shake the magnetism of Giuliana, the adrenaline rush of their secret. Despite these pangs of conscience, he rationalized that it was his life too. He'd worked endlessly for success, so he had earned an escape from the daily grind. He believed that as long as Eleanor never found out, no harm was done. After all, he was still providing for his wife and child. He still intended to keep his promise of giving them everything, but in the hidden corners of his mind, even he couldn't ignore the flicker of trepidation. Some part of him knew that if Eleanor discovered his betrayal, it would unravel everything. By the 7th month of Eleanor's pregnancy, her doctor recommended a period of rest and relaxation. High blood pressure and stress were common in first-time mothers, and a calm environment could make all the difference. Eleanor, remembering Marcus's initial grand suggestion of a trip to the south of France, brought up the possibility again. Her voice carried a quiet plea. "You said we would go together, just you and me, before the baby arrives." He nodded absently, scanning through his phone's endless alerts. She cradled her expanding belly, waiting for him to look at her with warmth, waiting for the man she once knew to surface. Finally, he pressed his phone's screen off, right, of course. A Babymoon. He smiled, but it felt forced. "Let me get my schedule in order, and we'll plan something special." Eleanor's face lit with hope. She felt a gush of relief that perhaps the old Marcus was still there under the layers of suits, spreadsheets, and urgent phone calls. She suggested a quaint coastal town in the south of France, perhaps Cassis or Antibes, somewhere quieter than the usual tourist hotspots. He agreed, half listening, half distracted by the beeping of another incoming message. Within days, however, business crises flared up like wildfires. An investor in Hong Kong threatened to pull out of a major deal. A West Coast tech company's stock was plummeting, which threatened Donovan Capital's stake. Conference calls spanned time zones. Meetings doubled, then tripled. Every day, Marcus found a new reason to postpone the trip. "Just one more week," he kept promising. "We'll head out as soon as I sort this out." Eleanor tried to remain patient. She decorated the nursery carefully, choosing pastel shades of green and yellow. She arranged for a local carpenter to craft a handmade crib. She even started prenatal yoga to maintain her health and manage her stress. Still, the longing to spend meaningful time with Marcus grew stronger, and the heartbreak of repeated postponements deepened. In the midst of that turmoil, a cunning idea crept into Juliana's mind. She knew all about the Babymoon plan. Marcus had once carelessly mentioned it, not realizing how it might ignite her envy. Juliana wanted Marcus to herself, unencumbered by marital obligations or the looming presence of a child. She manipulated him, planting seeds of discontent and urging him to take her somewhere far from the prying eyes of the media and corporate watchers. For once, she wanted to see if Marcus would pick her convenience over his wife's rightful place. Marcus, exhausted and lured by the promise of unrestrained pleasure, found himself agreeing. In a moment of self-delusion, he convinced himself that a quick getaway with Juliana was a better move. He could merge leisure with networking, claiming that she had connections to an international fashion mogul who could become a valuable investor. In the twisted logic of a man who had already begun to tangle his moral compass, it seemed justifiable. So he booked the flights, 4 days in the south of France. Luxury suite at an exclusive resort in Cannes, complete with private beach access and a dedicated concierge. He told Eleanor he had to leave unexpectedly for a business emergency in Europe. She was nearly 8 months pregnant, but the heartbreak in her eyes didn't stop him. He packed his suitcase hurriedly one afternoon, gave her a tepid kiss on the cheek, and said he'd call every day. As Marcus and Juliana soared across the Atlantic, Eleanor was left alone in the penthouse, the Babymoon brochures still on the kitchen counter, mocking the dream that was never realized. She felt a swelling ache in her chest, part anxiety, part suspicion. Although she wanted to believe him, cracks in her trust had begun to form. She sensed that something was off, but she couldn't yet piece it together. In Cannes, Marcus and Juliana basked in the sun, sipping on exotic cocktails under striped beach umbrellas. They indulged in gourmet meals, danced late into the night, and posted snippets of their lavish escapade on social media, albeit carefully curated, to avoid revealing each other's identities. Too blatantly, Marcus's official story was that this was a critical investor meeting. But in a world as interconnected as theirs, secrets can slip through the cracks faster than a wave receding on the shore. A paparazzo named Henri Lambert was trailing various celebrities that weekend. He was known for sniffing out the hidden corners where Europe's rich and famous frolicked away from public view. While scanning the beach for a rumored Hollywood couple, he stumbled upon Marcus Donovan and Juliana Moretti instead. At first, he couldn't believe his luck. Marcus Donovan was a rising star in the finance world, rumored to be squeaky clean and happily married. Yet here he was, comfortably entwined with a woman who was definitely not his pregnant wife. Henry snapped a flurry of photos, the two of them sipping wine on a balcony, Juliana leaning in to whisper in Marcus's ear a playful kiss on the cheek. None of it left any plausible deniability. Henry knew he had gold in his camera, a scandal involving a high-profile millionaire about to become a father. Tabloid heaven. He quickly sold the photos to a gossip website known as the Gold Coast Insider. Within hours, the pictures went viral. Social media platforms lit up with speculation. Who is this mystery woman? Where is his wife? The images were accompanied by headlines dripping with condemnation. Marcus Donovan's secret. Babymoon with Mistress finance, mogul in a scandalous affair. Even mainstream news sites picked up the rumor mill Eleanor was home in New York, nursing an aching back and reading baby blogs when her phone buzzed non-stop. She opened one message to find a link from an old college friend. "Elle, please, tell me this isn't real." Followed by the incriminating photos. For a heartbeat, she felt like the ground caved in beneath her. The images showed Marcus in an unmistakably intimate pose with a glamorous brunette. Shock turned to devastation, then to rising anger. Betrayal scorched through her veins. She slumped on the living room couch, tears falling silently as she clutched her pregnancy bump. How could he do this to her, to them? Her phone calls to Marcus went unanswered. She tried texting him, but the messages remained unread. In a panic, she called her mother, Lucinda, who arrived within the hour, enveloping Eleanor in a maternal hug that momentarily soothed her shattered heart. Yet not even a mother's love could fully dull the sting of this calamity. The headlines were everywhere, and the story was unstoppable. When Marcus finally saw the tabloid news panic set in, he tried to contact his public relations team to mitigate the scandal, but the damage was already colossal. Investors started asking questions. His phone rang incessantly with messages from business partners furious that this personal fiasco might tarnish their brand associations. Most of all, though, he dreaded hearing from Eleanor. He was 1,000 miles away, physically and emotionally, with no immediate plan to rectify the devastation he'd unleashed. Juliana, on the other hand, feigned worry, but secretly relished the storm. In her mind, this was an opportunity to force Marcus's hand. If his marriage was irrevocably damaged, he might choose her. She coaxed him, telling him that everything would be fine, that he could spin the narrative, but deep down she knew the path to power was lit up before her. Back in New York, Eleanor quietly fumed. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was a sense of betrayal that ignited a newfound resolve in her. She felt her unborn child move inside her, and that reminder filled her with fierce determination. The man she loved had humiliated her on a global stage. The father of her child had broken the final bond of trust. Through her tears, a seed of defiance began to grow. She would not crumble and be the sympathetic, powerless wife in this story. She would fight for her dignity and for her child's future. When Marcus returned to New York, the scandal was already raging. Eleanor met him in their penthouse, calm, composed, but with a steely gaze. "You've humiliated me," she said quietly. "You broke everything we built. I won't be a forgotten footnote in your story." Without drama or tears, Eleanor began to act. She may not have held financial power, but she knew her emotional and strategic contributions had helped shape Donovan Capital from the beginning. She hired Danielle Pierce, a formidable divorce lawyer, known for high-stakes corporate cases. Quietly they gathered evidence, financial records, contracts, early investments, all proving Eleanor's unseen influence in Marcus's empire. While Marcus focused on salvaging his image, Eleanor was preparing for war. Then came Juliana's twist, a sudden message claiming she was pregnant. Whether true or not, it rattled Marcus. But for Eleanor, it only fueled her resolve. She wasn't going to shield him anymore. With her baby due soon and the media still circling, Eleanor temporarily left the penthouse for her parents' quiet home. She wasn't retreating, she was regrouping. This time not as the betrayed wife, but as a woman ready to claim what was rightfully hers. As Eleanor's due date approached, the media frenzy refused to die down. Tongues wagged about whether she'd name Marcus as the father on the birth certificate if they proceeded with divorce. Stock in Donovan Capital Ventures dipped as rumors circulated that the founder was on the brink of losing control of his assets. Rival companies circled like sharks, ready to snap up clients or key employees who questioned Donovan Capital's stability. Under the weight of all these pressures, Marcus seemed to crumble. His once unshakable self-confidence slipped into desperation. He called Eleanor multiple times a day, begging for a face-to-face meeting. She granted him a single meeting under the watchful eye of her lawyer, Danielle Pierce, at a neutral location, a private conference room at Clark and Grayton. Law firm. When Marcus arrived, he looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, suit jacket hanging off his once proud shoulders. Eleanor, on the other hand, wore a simple navy maternity dress and radiated a quiet strength. She was mere weeks away from delivering her belly, a poignant reminder of all that was at stake. Marcus attempted a gentle approach. "Eleanor, I've made terrible mistakes," he said, voice trembling. "I want to fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." She studied him for a long moment, her eyes reflecting sorrow and disappointment. Danielle, seated beside her, remained silent, but watchful. Finally, Eleanor replied softly, "We cannot be fixed." "Marcus, you did not just break our vows, you shattered my trust. That is something I can't repair. I'm here to discuss a settlement only for the sake of our child's future." Marcus pleaded for a second chance, enumerating the ways he could make amends. He would cut off Juliana completely, vow fidelity, attend therapy. However, the time for contrition had passed. Eleanor made it clear she wanted a divorce, and not just a simple one. She wanted a fair share of the empire, citing her intangible but vital contributions to the business's growth. Danielle slid a carefully prepared document across the table, listing assets that would be put in Eleanor's name. It included a controlling stake of certain business ventures, real estate properties, and trust funds for the child. Marcus's face blanched. His initial reaction was disbelief, followed by anger. "This is absurd," he spat. You have no right to dismantle my company." Danielle calmly explained the legal precedents supporting Eleanor's case. She detailed how the intangible contributions of a spouse could factor into a divorce settlement, particularly given the nature of how Donovan Capital Ventures expanded. She hinted at potential reputational damage if certain internal documents were made public. This was the final straw. The unspoken threat of financial audits, negative media attention, and investor flight made Marcus realize that losing a large portion of his empire might be unavoidable if he didn't negotiate. The meeting concluded in a cold standoff. Marcus stormed out, furious at Danielle, and by extension, furious at Eleanor. For her part, Eleanor left feeling both liberated and terrified. She was stepping into an unknown future, but at least she was no longer treading water in the whirlpool of Marcus's transgressions. She returned to her parents' home, trying to focus on her baby's imminent arrival, rather than the storm swirling around her. Eleanor went into labor on a quiet Sunday morning. The world outside was still enthralled with the scandal, but within the walls of Lucinda and Robert Taylor's home, all that mattered was bringing new life into the world. With her mother and a private doula by her side, Eleanor felt contractions that intensified by the hour Marcus received a call from Eleanor's mother, telling him that he could come to the hospital if he wished Eleanor had agreed for him to be present, not as her partner, but as the father of the child. Despite the tension, she believed their baby had the right to both parents at the birth. In a rush of guilt and paternal instinct, Marcus cancelled his meetings and raced to Mount Sinai Hospital. When he arrived, Eleanor was already in active labor, sweat beading on her forehead, breathing heavily through contractions. She acknowledged his presence with a nod. There was no forgiveness in her eyes, but there was also no malice at that moment. Whatever had passed between them, they were both there to welcome their child. After hours of determined pushing, baby Henry Donovan entered the world with a hearty cry. He had Eleanor's delicate features, but Marcus's intense gaze. Watching him take his first breath brought tears to Marcus's eyes. Tears of awe, shame, and overwhelming emotion. Eleanor spent from the labor, cradled Henry gently, all her focus on this tiny being who held the promise of a new beginning. For a brief time, the hospital room seemed suspended in tranquility. Marcus murmured an apology to Eleanor, and she simply nodded, too exhausted to pass the complexities of their fractured relationship. The press inevitably got wind of the birth, but the hospital's security kept them at bay. Danielle discreetly arranged for an extended stay so Eleanor could recover, without the media circus camped outside her door. Yet the respite was short-lived. Once Henry was born, the details of the divorce settlement took on a new urgency. Even as he marveled at his newborn son, Marcus was bombarded by calls from his lawyers urging him to avoid signing away the empire. He faced a decision: risk a protracted legal battle that could drag on for years and wreak havoc on his business reputation, or meet Eleanor's demands for a settlement that would permanently alter his fortune. During one of Eleanor's quieter moments in the hospital, Marcus approached her. "I don't want to fight you in court. Our child shouldn't grow up watching us tear each other apart." Eleanor studied him, her expression neutral. She too didn't want a prolonged battle, especially with Henry's future to consider. She simply stated, "Then come to an agreement with Danielle. Stop trying to cling to power because in the end, you'll lose more than just money." In that moment, Marcus glimpsed anew. Eleanor resolved, resilient, and far from the naive, gentle soul he had once taken for granted. He recognized that she was not only fighting for her own dignity, but for the child they had brought into the world. Though a flicker of pride stirred in his heart at her strength, it was overshadowed by the realization that he was on the losing side of this battle. Morally, and soon financially, Eleanor Donovan sat in the back seat of a black SUV, its tinted windows shielding her from the flashbulbs that exploded along Manhattan's bustling sidewalks. Cradling baby Henry in her arms, she felt a surge of protectiveness and an equal measure of quiet determination. The day had finally come for her legal team to square off with Marcus and his lawyers. She gazed through the tinted glass at the soaring skyscrapers. Once this city had symbolized the pinnacle of her husband's ambition. Now it was the stage on which she would fight for her dignity, her child's future, and a fair claim to the empire she had helped build. The legal battleground was the top-floor conference suite at Clark & Grayton Law Firm, a stately glass tower rising like a monolith of power in midtown Manhattan. Eleanor's lawyer Danielle Pierce was known in elite circles as the litigator you'd hire if you had everything to lose. She had already amassed hundreds of files, emails and financial statements that documented the many ways Eleanor had contributed, directly or indirectly, to the expansion of Donovan Capital Ventures. And yet Danielle insisted on another layer of evidence personal testimony about Eleanor's role behind the scenes. The intangible but crucial ways she had secured philanthropic deals and introduced Marcus to key art investors now held center stage in the negotiations. In the weeks leading up to the showdown, Danielle worked around the clock. She had enlisted the help of forensic accountants to comb through Donovan Capital's labyrinthine web of offshore companies and shell subsidiaries. Every questionable transaction that might hint at hidden funds or deliberate concealments was highlighted and sorted into neat binders. There were also frantic late-night calls with potential witnesses like the couple's longtime financial advisor, Richard Albright, who'd confided how Eleanor's early inheritance had covered some of Marcus's high-risk investments. Eleanor had never bragged about that early contribution. She had believed in her husband wholeheartedly and wanted to see his dreams come true. Now that goodwill became proof of her rightful claim. Meanwhile, Marcus's legal team was scrambling to protect him. They were led by a seasoned corporate attorney named Vivian Hill, known for her no-nonsense style and an unflinching loyalty to wealthy executives. Vivian's approach was simple: attack, discredit, and minimize Eleanor's role. She intended to lean on the couple's prenuptial agreement, a document that on paper seemed to limit Eleanor's share should the marriage dissolve. But as Danielle Pierce liked to remind people in such high-stakes divorces, no prenup is bulletproof when moral turpitude and undisclosed assets come into play. Eleanor didn't attend the initial round of negotiations. Holding a newborn in a stuffy boardroom filled with adversaries was the last thing she wanted. Instead, she stayed in the comfort of her Brooklyn townhouse, nursing Henry, while Danielle and her associate Martin Feldman headed the talks. But the moment Danielle walked through those heavy glass doors, the tension was palpable. On one side of the long mahogany table, Marcus Donovan sat stiff-backed arms, folded protectively over his chest. His once impeccable confidence was fraying at the edges. Dark circles beneath his eyes hinted at nights lost to worry. The CFO of Donovan Capital, Daniel Redwood, a private confidant to Marcus for years, sat beside him in a pinstriped suit, methodically tapping a pen against a legal pad. Redwood's face gave nothing away, but the deeper lines on his brow suggested he knew exactly how precarious Marcus's position had become. Across from them was Danielle, impeccably dressed in a charcoal grey suit that seemed tailored to exude power. Her eyes flicked over the group in a cool, assessing glance, zeroing in on Marcus. "You did this to yourself, buddy," she seemed to say. Without uttering a word, Vivian Hill cleared her throat and began. "My client is prepared to offer a sizable monetary settlement," she said, handing out typed sheets. We respect Mrs. Donovan's contributions, but we believe the prenuptial agreement stands." Danielle allowed herself a small, knowing smile. She flipped through the pages without so much as a pause, and then calmly placed them on the table. "My client seeks more than a one-time payout. She seeks ongoing support for the child. Yes, but also recognition of the intangible support she gave to Donovan Capital. We have itemized evidence, emails, schedules, financial entries, showing how Mrs. Donovan facilitated multiple investor introductions and philanthropic partnerships that led to direct profitability for Donovan Capital." Vivian bristled but maintained her composure. "We dispute the scope of those contributions." Danielle's eyes narrowed. "Perhaps we should discuss the early loan from Mrs. Donovan's inheritance, which helped your client secure the original office space and cover those initial margin calls during Donovan Capital's first expansion phase. I believe the figure was—" She checked a document, $250,000, hardly pocket change. "We also have Mr. Richard Albright, the couple's longtime financial advisor, ready to testify that Mrs. Donovan's involvement was fundamental to the firm's survival in its infancy." Marcus's expression darkened. He had hoped that early personal loan would remain a forgotten piece of ancient history, but Danielle was resurrecting every skeleton buried in Donovan Capital's closet. Even as the negotiations grew heated, an unspoken spectre hovered over the table. Juliana Moretti, the mistress whose presence had triggered the avalanche of scandal. Though physically absent from the boardroom, her impact was undeniable. Gossip rags still speculated about her rumored pregnancy. Investors quietly mulled whether Donovan Capital was hemorrhaging funds to appease her. And in hushed conversations, people wondered if Juliana might sell her story to a tell-all publication. As if on cue, Marcus's phone buzzed noisily, cutting through the tense silence. He glanced at it and his jaw tightened. Danielle raised an eyebrow. Vivian slammed a folder shut, irate at the interruption. "We need a moment," Vivian announced, escorting Marcus into an adjacent private lounge. Inside the lounge, Marcus exhaled heavily. He stared at the text from Juliana. "We have unfinished business. If you don't meet me tonight, I'll go public." It was a threat she'd lobbed before, but in the heat of divorce negotiations, the stakes were higher than ever. "Is it her?" Vivian asked, arms crossed. "Yeah," Marcus muttered, rubbing his temples. "She's threatening to spill everything if I don't." Vivian cut him off, voice low with frustration. "We don't have time for this. We're already negotiating from a position of weakness. Danielle Pierce has evidence that could shred your reputation if it goes to trial. If Juliana also goes to the media, it's over. You'll lose what little leverage you have left." Marcus felt a swell of anger mingle with defeat. He wanted to lash out, to break something, to be rid of Juliana and her manipulations. But he was caught trapped by the consequences of his own betrayal. "What do I do?" he asked, almost whispering. "Handle it," Vivian said sharply. "Shut her down. Get her to sign an NDA. Throw money at her if you must. But do not let her sabotage these negotiations." When they returned to the conference room, Danielle and Martin were exchanging quiet words. Danielle looked up, assessing Marcus's grim expression. She could guess Juliana had just made her presence known again. Good, Danielle thought. Let him squirm. It only strengthened her side of the table. The negotiations resumed, and over the course of the next 3 hours the atmosphere grew even heavier. Danielle meticulously dissected Donovan Capital's structure, pointing to subsidiary after subsidiary that had flourished because of philanthropic connections forged by Eleanor. She cited philanthropic galas, where Eleanor had introduced Marcus to major art patrons like Penelope Carnegie, who later became a silent investor. She had emails confirming Eleanor's role in persuading a West Coast museum patron to place $1 million trust with Donovan Capital. On and on it went, each bullet point chipping away at the notion that Eleanor was merely a supportive spouse with no legal claim. Marcus's lawyers attempted to minimize and deflect. "These are normal acts of spousal support," Vivian stated firmly. "They don't necessarily translate into equity stakes or managerial control." Danielle caught Marcus's gaze. "My client is not asking for half the company," she explained, voice firm but measured. "She wants an equitable share, reflecting the intangible contributions that were instrumental in turning Donovan Capital into the success it is today. Moreover, she wants a controlling interest in the philanthropic branch, which was largely her brainchild." Marcus's brow furrowed. The philanthropic branch. A small part of the firm, yes, but one with growing influence and positive press. Handing it over would mean giving Eleanor a permanent seat at the table of Donovan Capital's future. He imagined the headlines, "Eleanor Donovan heads, philanthropic ventures after high-profile divorce." It made him feel nauseous, but his options were dwindling by the second. Redwood leaned in and whispered something to Marcus, presumably about the potential damage to investor confidence if the negotiations dragged on. Marcus nodded curtly, then turned to Vivian. They shared a brief, tense exchange of whispers. Finally, Vivian laid down her pen. "We will consider this philanthropic branch as negotiable." Danielle's eyes flicked to Martin, a silent note of victory passing between them. The philanthropic division was not just a footnote in Donovan Capital's portfolio. It was a rising star with significant press coverage for eco-friendly initiatives and socially responsible tech investments. Ceding control of it was a symbolic blow to Marcus's legacy. What followed was a grueling carousel of back-and-forth bartering. Marcus offered a one-time payout that would set Eleanor up for life. Danielle refused unless it included child support, reflecting the lifestyle Henry would have had if the marriage remained intact. When Marcus's team countered with a smaller monthly figure, Danielle threatened to reveal offshore accounts and questionable business practices. In open court, a guaranteed feeding frenzy for regulators and tabloids alike. Eleanor, following the negotiations from her home through text updates from Danielle, felt a swirl of emotions. Part of her despised the transactional nature of these talks. "This is my life," she thought. "My marriage." But there was no denying that wealth was a tool to secure a stable future for her son. She reminded herself that no amount of money could replace the trust Marcus had shattered, but it could ensure Henry never lacked for opportunity. Meanwhile, as the hours stretched, Marcus's phone kept buzzing. Juliana's messages grew more desperate. "Answer me or face the consequences." He battled the urge to throw his phone across the room. Danielle noticed his agitation and made a mental note that Juliana's tactics were likely driving him to make hurried decisions, an advantage for her client. At around 7 in the evening, both teams called for a recess, leaving the table strewn with legal pads, half-empty coffee cups, and a storm of scattered documents. Marcus slumped in his chair, loosened his tie, and rubbed his eyes. In the hallway, Redwood took a phone call from the Donovan Capital board, who demanded an update. The board was growing furious at the negative media coverage. They wanted this scandal tidied up faster. Danielle and Martin stepped into a private corner where they whispered about final strategies. "If we push him on philanthropic control, we can likely secure a stake in that ecotech subsidiary too." Martin suggested. Danielle nodded, eyes gleaming. With the board pushing Marcus to settle, he was more malleable to their demands. She drafted a quick bullet list on her tablet, preparing for one last push when they reconvened. An hour later, the negotiations climaxed. Vivian, clearly exasperated, announced, "We have a client who is willing to cooperate, but only if the settlement includes confidentiality clauses about Donovan Capital's internal finances. Danielle nodded. We can include mutual NDAs on the finances, on the condition that Mrs. Donovan retains complete ownership of the philanthropic branch and partial equity in the Ecotech spin-off. She handed over a revised agreement. Sign this tonight, or we walk away and proceed to trial. Marcus locked eyes with Danielle, then lowered his gaze to the document. He knew this was the best offer he'd get. If he went to court, Danielle could drag out every skeleton in Donovan Capital's closet, not just the affair, but any shady financial corners he'd cut in the firm's early days. Share prices would plummet, and the board would oust him for good. He gave a weary nod to Vivian, who let out a resigned sigh and pushed the papers across the table. Donovan, Vivian said, extending a pen sign here. Marcus gripped the pen, his gaze distant, as he scrawled his signature in the designated boxes. With each stroke of ink, a chunk of his empire slipped away. Danielle carefully collected the documents. "Thank you, Mr. Donovan," she said, her tone formal. She tapped them into a neat stack and placed them in her briefcase. "My client appreciates your cooperation, and I'll have the final copies delivered to you by tomorrow." Standing, Marcus thrust his hands into his pockets and stared at the floor. He'd never felt so powerless. The hush in the room was thick with finality. Later that night in her Brooklyn townhouse, Eleanor received a phone call from Danielle. "It's done," Danielle announced. "We have controlling interest of the philanthropic branch, partial equity in Ecotech, sufficient child support, and a non-disclosure arrangement to protect your personal details. Henry will be well provided for, and you'll have the freedom to guide the philanthropy division. However you see fit." Eleanor closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. Relief mingled with a pang of sorrow. She'd stood up for herself and won. But it had come at the cost of accepting that her marriage and the man she'd once adored were lost to a web of lies and betrayal. Still, as she looked down at baby Henry, dozing in a bassinet nearby, she felt a flicker of hope. He would never want for stability or security. She had ensured that his future wasn't tied to Marcus's reckless choices. Across town, Marcus sat alone in his penthouse, now stripped of many personal touches, as Eleanor's belongings had been removed. The echoing silence was almost cruel. His phone buzzed again. Juliana, no doubt. He stared at the screen but couldn't bring himself to answer. His empire was in freefall, his reputation tarnished, and the only family he had now seemed beyond his reach. He sank into a leather armchair, head in his hands, as the lights of the city stretched out below him in apathetic indifference. The legal war was over, but the aftermath would ripple for years. In the eyes of the world, Eleanor had seized a critical piece of Donovan Capital's future, an accomplishment that would soon send her star rising in philanthropic and business circles alike. Marcus, once hailed as a visionary titan, watched his kingdom fracture under the weight of his own hubris. And somewhere out there, in the swirl of scandal and secrecy, Juliana Moretti plotted her next move, determined to claim whatever she could from the empire's wreckage. But for Eleanor, the greatest triumph was not the money or even the philanthropic branch. It was reclaiming her autonomy, proving that she was more than just a shadow in Marcus's ambitious world. The settlement marked an end, yet for her and Henry, it was also the quiet beginning of a far more authentic life, one built on the unshakable foundation of self-respect and unconditional love. In the weeks after the settlement, life moved at a breathless pace. Marcus attempted damage control with his board, reassuring them that Donovan Capital Ventures still had strong leadership. However, the trust between him and his key partners was irrevocably eroded. Several major investors parted ways, citing moral and reputational concerns. Others demanded restructuring that further diluted Marcus's control. Juliana's claims of pregnancy were eventually discredited. She had never provided legitimate proof, and many suspected it was a ploy. Jilted and humiliated, she slinked off to Europe, facing her own set of gossip. By contrast, Eleanor found a surprising sense of renewal. She relocated to a serene townhouse in a family-friendly neighborhood in Brooklyn. With her parents' help, she furnished the space so it exuded warmth and creativity. Local artwork on the walls, a cozy reading nook by the window, and a sunlit nursery for Henry between breastfeeding late-night lullabies and the occasional meltdown. She felt more alive than ever. There was sadness still for the broken dreams and the man she once loved. But she also felt unshackled free to chart her own course. Despite not being a ruthless business tycoon, Eleanor found herself thrust into an unexpected position of power. The philanthropic branch of Donovan Capital that she controlled needed direction, and she gave it wholeheartedly. She rebranded it as the Green Horizon Fund, focusing on eco-sustainability, social justice initiatives, and arts in underprivileged communities. She hired a small team of like-minded individuals, some from Marcus's circle, who felt more aligned with her vision. In an ironic twist, the Green Horizon Fund quickly garnered positive media attention, drawing in philanthropic entrepreneurs who had grown skeptical of traditional profit-obsessed finance. Financially secure from the divorce settlement, Eleanor didn't have to scramble for revenue. Instead, she invested her emotional energy in building a legacy that Henry could be proud of. The mother who once quietly supported her husband's dream now became a leader in her own right. And the world noticed, meanwhile. Marcus struggled in the shadows. The scandal's aftershock still rippled through the corporate world, making every new partnership a challenge. He sold off some properties to maintain the liquidity needed to stabilize Donovan Capital. Investors demanded transparency, and he spent sleepless nights just trying to preserve what was left. The flamboyant lifestyle he once enjoyed with private jets and lavish parties was replaced by frantic, damage-control dinners and closed-door negotiations. The final blow, Karma's crowning moment, arrived when a whistleblower from Juliana's circle leaked incriminating details of Marcus's offshore accounts and questionable business practices. Though not entirely illegal, the revelations cast serious doubts on his ethics. Regulators launched inquiries. The board forced him to temporarily step down as CEO, installing an interim figurehead to steer Donovan Capital until the dust settled. Marcus, once the unstoppable force in the world of high finance, found himself drowning in self-inflicted misery. He tried to see Henry when he could court-ordered visitation schedules. Sometimes he'd gaze at his son in the crib, marveling at how pure and untainted the child was by the swirling chaos. In those tender, wordless moments, he realized the depth of his miscalculation. He had gained the world in fleeting fame and fortune, but lost the loyalty of a good woman, the stability of a solid family, and the respect of those who once admired him. Eleanor, on the other hand, glowed with the fulfillment of someone who had found her path, albeit through heartbreak. She no longer carried the illusions of a fairy tale marriage. Instead, she stood firm on a foundation of self-worth, maternal devotion, and a dream that had become her own to shape. She was far from perfect. Late nights still brought sorrowful memories, and the weight of single parenthood was immense. But each step forward, every milestone in the Green Horizon Fund and every coo or giggle from Henry reminded her that she was not just surviving. She was thriving. In the end, the story of Marcus Donovan's Babymoon betrayal was overshadowed by a far more compelling narrative. The remarkable resilience of Eleanor Donovan, the woman who refused to be a victim of circumstance. She had taken the shattered pieces of her marriage and transformed them into building blocks for a future she could proudly call her own. The empire that Marcus once claimed as his birthright was now reshaped by the very person he had betrayed, and the world applauded the justice in that reversal of fortune. In this whirlwind saga of infidelity, heartbreak, and karmic justice, we've witnessed how a man's towering ambitions and insatiable desires can unravel everything he cherishes. From the moment Marcus Donovan betrayed his pregnant wife to the day she claimed a defining stake in his empire, destiny proved that true power lies not in wealth, but in loyalty, trust, and resilience. Eleanor's journey, rising from the ashes of humiliation to build a life of purpose and success, reminds us that no betrayal is ever the final chapter, and redemption often favors the strong of heart. If you found this story gripping and want more real-life drama and inspiring tales of transformation, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us bring you more compelling narratives. So stay tuned, and thank you for joining us on this unforgettable ride of scandal, sacrifice, and ultimate triumph. What happens when the silent partner is no longer silent? For 10 years, Ava Donovan was the invisible architect behind a billion-dollar empire, while her husband Cole Harrington basked in the spotlight. She was the strategist, the operator, the steady hand that built Innovate Dynamics from a garage startup into a tech behemoth. He was the face, the charm, the celebrated CEO. But when the foundation of their perfect life, a foundation she meticulously built, is shattered by the oldest betrayal. In the book, she doesn't reach for a divorce lawyer to fight over the house and the cars. She reaches for a clause buried deep in the company's bylaws, a secret fail-safe she created long ago. This isn't a story about a marriage ending. It's the story of how a woman pushed to the edge reminded everyone who truly held the power all along. The penthouse on the 72nd floor of 157 wasn't just a home. It was a statement. From the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan sprawled below like a glittering circuit board, a city of infinite connections and buzzing energy. It was a view that Cole Harrington, CEO of Innovate Dynamics, felt he had earned. He would often stand there, a glass of Macallan 25 in hand, and look down on the world he was conquering. His wife, Ava Donovan, preferred the view from the other side of the apartment, the one overlooking the quiet expanse of Central Park. To her, the park represented something organic, complex, and beautiful, a system that grew and thrived through intricate, unseen processes. It was much like the company she had helped build. On the surface, Cole and Ava were the ultimate power couple. He was impossibly handsome, with a charismatic smile and a voice that could coax venture capitalists into parting with 8-figure sums. He was the public face of Innovate Dynamics, gracing the covers of Forbes and Wired, giving TED Talks on the future of AI-driven logistics, and charming senators at DC fundraisers. Ava was his elegant, reserved counterpart. At charity galas, she was always perfectly dressed, a serene smile on her face, a supportive hand on his arm. Most people in their circle saw her as the classic billionaire's wife, a beautiful accessory who managed their homes in the city, and the Hamptons planned their social calendar and sat on philanthropic boards. They had no idea that she was the company's operational backbone. They had started Innovate Dynamics a decade ago in a cramped Palo Alto apartment. Cole was the visionary, the big ideas guy. He could see the future, but he couldn't build the road to get there. Ava, with her dual degrees in computer science and systems engineering from MIT, was the architect. She wrote the foundational code for their flagship software, Nexus, and designed the entire operational framework that allowed the company to scale. They had a simple arrangement in the beginning. Cole was CEO, the public face. Ava took the title of Chief Strategy Officer, a deliberately vague role that allowed her to work behind the scenes, unburdened by press interviews and shareholder meetings, which she despised. She managed the engineering teams, optimized the data flow, and ensured the intricate machine of the company ran without a single hiccup. Cole sold the dream. Ava built the reality. But over the years, the lines had blurred and history had been subtly rewritten. Cole's vision began to eclipse Ava's execution in the public narrative and eventually within the walls of their own home. He began to see her not as his partner, but as his most reliable employee. "Sweetheart, the numbers for the quarterly report look a little soft. Can you have your guys polish them up before the board meeting?" he'd say, not looking up from his phone as she passed him his morning espresso. Her guys. They were all her guys, the teams she had personally hired and mentored. "The server latency in the European sector is up by 0.2%. I've already deployed a patch," she'd reply, her tone even. "Great. Glad you're on top of it," he'd murmur, already absorbed in an email from his publicist. The condescension was subtle, 1,000 tiny cuts that had slowly eroded the foundation of their partnership. He had forgotten the all-nighters she pulled, the server fires she put out at 3 a.m., the ingenious algorithm she designed that had become the company's crown jewel. He saw the penthouse, the private jet, the glowing magazine articles, and believed they were reflections of his singular genius. Ava saw them as the joint output of a machine she had built, and now felt increasingly alienated from. Her world had become a gilded cage, beautiful and suffocating. The parties felt hollow. The praise directed at her husband felt like a form of erasure. The only place she still felt a sense of purpose was in the work itself. Late at night, long after Cole was asleep or out at a networking dinner, she would sit in her home office, a sleek, minimalist room that was her private sanctuary. The rest of the penthouse was decorated to Cole's ostentatious taste. But this room was all hers. On her monitors, lines of code and complex data streams flowed the pure, logical and honest language she understood better than anything. It was here in the silent hum of the servers that she was not Mrs. Harrington, the socialite, but Ava Donovan, the engineer, and it was this version of herself she was starting to miss more than anything. The first crack appeared not as a seismic tremor, but as a hairline fracture, almost invisible to the naked eye. It was a Tuesday night in late October. Cole was supposedly in Chicago, closing a major deal with a logistics conglomerate. He was due back the next morning. Ava was working late, troubleshooting a persistent bug in a new software update. Around 11 p.m., her phone buzzed with a notification from their shared credit card account. Charge $758.90. Le Bernardin, New York, NY. Ava stared at the notification, a frown creasing her brow. Le Bernardin, one of the city's most exclusive and romantic restaurants, and definitely not in Chicago. It was probably a mistake, she told herself. A card skimmed or a delayed charge from a previous dinner. She dismissed it and went back to her work, but a small, cold seed of unease had been planted. The next morning, Cole returned jubilant. "We got it, Ava. The Omnicorp deal is done. They signed this morning." He kissed her, his suit jacket smelling faintly of travel and success. "Congratulations, Cole. That's fantastic," she said, managing a genuine smile. "How was Chicago?" "Cold, boring." All I saw was the inside of a conference room and my hotel. I ate room service and passed out. He said it so casually, so smoothly, that for a moment she believed him. But the Le Bernardin charge lingered in the back of her mind, a loose thread on a perfect tapestry. She decided not to pull it. Not yet. A week later, the second crack appeared. Cole was in a board meeting at the Innovate Dynamics headquarters on Park Avenue. Ava was working from her home office when a courier delivered a package for him, a custom-made suit from a tailor on Savile Row. As she signed for it, she noticed the faint scent of perfume clinging to the outer packaging. It was a fragrance she didn't recognize, floral with a sharp, musky undertone. Something modern and aggressive. It was nothing like her own subtle classic Chanel No. 5. Again, she tried to rationalize it. The courier, perhaps, or someone in the tailor's shop. But the seed of unease was beginning to sprout. Ava was an engineer. She didn't deal in vague suspicions. She dealt in data. Hunches were hypotheses, and hypotheses needed to be tested. That evening, as Cole showered before a gala, she walked into their cavernous walk-in closet. His travel bag from the Chicago trip was still on a bench. With a clinical detachment she didn't know she possessed, she unzipped it. Tucked into a side pocket was a folded receipt. The Peninsula Chicago. Room 1812. Room service for one. $87.50. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. There it was. Proof. He was telling the truth. But as she went to put the receipt back, another piece of paper slipped out from behind it. It wasn't a receipt. It was a valet ticket. The Peninsula, New York. Date last Tuesday. Time in 7:15 p.m. Time out 32 a.m. The blood drained from her face. The Peninsula, New York, not Chicago. He had been in the city the entire time. The dinner at Le Bernardin, the late night. It wasn't a mistake. It was a lie, a carefully constructed, deliberate lie. Her mind, trained to find patterns and solve complex problems, began to connect the dots. The late-night investor calls that he always took out on the terrace. The sudden weekend golf trips to courses he'd never expressed interest in before. The new expensive cologne he'd started wearing. And the name that kept popping up in company emails and meeting minutes, Cassandra Rowe. Cassandra was a recent hire, a sharp, ambitious MBA from Wharton, who had quickly risen to become the vice president of business development. She was beautiful in a severe corporate way, with sharp cheekbones and a wardrobe of form-fitting power suits. Cole had championed her hiring, praising her aggressive, forward-thinking strategies. Ava had found her overly sycophantic, but had dismissed it as the behavior of an ambitious subordinate. Now she saw it in a different light. Ava walked out of the closet and sat on the edge of their bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. The valet ticket felt like a lead weight in her hand. For 10 years, she had dedicated her life to building this company, this life, this partnership. She had trusted Cole implicitly, believing that while their roles had diverged, their ultimate goal was the same. Now she saw the chilling truth. While she had been building an empire, he had been building a separate life within it. The porcelain facade of their perfect marriage had not just cracked, it was about to shatter. And as the initial shock gave way to a cold, crystalline fury, Ava Donovan knew one thing for certain. She would not be the one cut by the shards. The following Friday, Cole told Ava he had to fly to London for an emergency meeting with their European investors. "It's a complete firestorm," he said, packing a briefcase with feigned urgency. "The board is demanding a face-to-face. I'll be back Sunday morning. Don't wait up." Ava watched him, her expression a perfect mask of wifely concern. Of course. Be safe. But this time she was prepared. She was no longer operating on suspicion. She was collecting data for a final definitive proof. For the past week, she had been a ghost in her own life, observing, noting, and planning. She had installed a location-sharing app on his phone months ago, under the guise of security, a precaution he had readily agreed to. He had no idea she could access it from her own devices. An hour after he left for JFK, the app showed his phone's location pinging not at the airport, but at the Greenwich Hotel in Tribeca, a boutique hotel known for its privacy and exclusivity. Ava didn't rush. She didn't call him screaming accusations. Instead, a chilling calm settled over her. She took a shower, styled her hair, and put on a simple but elegant black dress. She looked in the mirror not at a betrayed wife, but at a CEO about to handle a hostile takeover. Her objective was not emotional release, it was confirmation. She drove herself downtown, her knuckles white on the steering wheel of her Tesla. The rage was there, a white-hot coil in her stomach, but her mind was icily clear. She parked a block away and walked to the hotel, the cool night air, doing little to quell the fire inside her. At the front desk, she smiled warmly at the concierge. "Hi. I'm supposed to be meeting my husband Cole Harrington. I believe he's already checked in." "I'm so sorry, my phone just died, and he was supposed to send me the room number." She projected an air of breezy confidence, the kind of woman who belonged in a place like this. The concierge, a polished young man named Daniel, tapped at his computer. "Of course, Mrs. Harrington. He's in the fireplace suite, room 402. Shall I call up for you?" "Oh no, please don't," she said, her smile never faltering. "I want to surprise him." "Of course," he replied, returning her smile. "Enjoy your evening." As she walked towards the elevator, Ava felt a strange sense of dissociation, as if she were watching a character in a movie. The elevator ride was silent, the plush, wood-paneled car, ascending like a slow-motion executioner's cart. When she reached the 4th floor, she walked down the dimly lit hallway, her heels making no sound on the thick carpet. She stood before room 402 for a long moment, taking a single deep breath. She had a spare keycard to all their accounts, another security measure she'd insisted on. She held it up to the sensor. The light flashed green with a soft electronic click. The door swung open silently. The suite was large, dominated by a roaring fireplace, and in the warm glow of the flames she saw them. Cole was on the sofa. His tie loosened, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Kneeling before him, her back to the door, was Cassandra Rowe. Her sharp, tailored blazer was tossed over a chair, and she was wearing a silk blouse that was partially unbuttoned. She was laughing, reaching up to run a hand through Cole's hair. The scene was so intimate, so comfortable, so utterly devoid of the firestorm meeting he was supposed to be in, that the air was knocked from Ava's lungs. They hadn't heard her enter. "The board is just a bunch of old men, Cole," Cassandra was saying, her voice dripping with dismissive arrogance. "They don't see the future. You do. We do." Cole chuckled a low, smug sound. "They just need to be managed. Don't worry about them. They'll fall in line." He leaned down to kiss her. It was then that he saw her. His eyes widened over Cassandra's shoulder, the color draining from his face. He froze his lips inches from hers. The smug confidence evaporated, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated panic. Cassandra, sensing the change, turned. Her own expression shifted from seduction to horror in a split second. She scrambled to her feet, fumbling with the buttons of her blouse. Silence. The only sound was the crackling of the fire. Ava didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't throw anything. She simply stood in the doorway, her gaze sweeping over the scene with the cool, analytical precision of an engineer diagnosing a catastrophic system failure. She looked at Cole's panicked face, at Cassandra's pathetic attempt to regain her composure, at the 2 half-empty glasses on the coffee table, at the rumpled cushions on the sofa. Data points. "London looks a lot like Tribeca this time of year," Ava said, her voice unnervingly calm. "Ava, this isn't what it looks like," Cole stammered, getting to his feet. It was the weakest, most cliché line imaginable, and it hung in the air like a foul odor. "Really?" Ava replied, a single eyebrow arched. "Because it looks exactly like what it is. It looks like you've been lying to me. It looks like you've been using company resources to facilitate an affair with a subordinate. And it looks like you are monumentally stupid for thinking I wouldn't find out." Cassandra found her voice a high, reedy sound. "This is a private matter." Ava's head snapped towards her, her eyes like chips of ice. "When you sleep with the CEO of a publicly traded company, your work for it stops being a private matter, Ms. Rowe. It becomes a question of corporate governance, ethics, and fiduciary duty. You should know that. You went to Wharton after all." Cassandra visibly flinched. Ava's gaze returned to her husband. The hurt was there, a deep, tectonic agony, but she refused to let him see it. Instead, she let him see the cold fury that was now crystallizing into purpose. "Get your things," she said to Cassandra, her voice leaving no room for argument. "You have 5 minutes to vacate this room." Then she looked at Cole, who stood there, utterly paralyzed. "You and I have a board meeting to prepare for." She turned and walked out, closing the door softly behind her. She didn't slam it. A slam would have been an emotional release. This was a tactical withdrawal. The battle was over. The war was just beginning. Ava didn't go home. The penthouse felt tainted, a stage set for a life that was no longer real. Instead, she drove to a quiet hotel in a different part of the city, checked in under her maiden name, and opened her laptop. The initial shockwave of betrayal was receding, replaced by the familiar hum of strategic thinking. Grief was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. Action was the only antidote. Her first call was to Robert Chen, a senior partner at Wachtell, Lipton, Rosen and Katz. Robert wasn't just any corporate lawyer. He was the razor-sharp, legal mind Ava had insisted on hiring when they first incorporated Innovate Dynamics. Cole had wanted a flashier firm one that sponsored golf tournaments. Ava had wanted the best. As with most things, she had won that argument. "Robert," she said when he picked up his voice, groggy with sleep. It was after midnight. "It's Ava Donovan. We have a situation. I need to invoke Article 4, Section 8B of the Innovate Dynamics Founding Charter." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Ava could almost hear the gears turning in Robert's formidable brain as he accessed a decade-old memory file. "Section 8B. He finally said, his voice now wide awake and sharp. "The moral turpitude and fiduciary integrity clause. Are you certain, Ava?" "I have definitive, inarguable proof," she replied, her voice as steady as steel. "I'll forward the documentation to your secure server within the hour. I'll be at my office at 6 a.m. We'll need to call an emergency board meeting." Robert said, his tone all business. "This is going to be a detonation." "I know," Ava said. "Bring a fire extinguisher." She hung up and began to assemble her case. This was her true genius. Not just in writing code, but in architecting systems, be they software or legal frameworks, to be robust, logical, and prepared for every contingency. 10 years ago, as a bright-eyed but already cautious co-founder, Ava had looked at the standard partnership agreements and found them lacking. They protected against financial malfeasance, criminal activity, and gross negligence. But they didn't protect against the more insidious threats, arrogance, recklessness, and the kind of personal behavior that could irrevocably damage the company's reputation and internal morale. So with Robert Chen's help, she had drafted Section 8B. It was a unique and powerful clause buried deep within the legal boilerplate of the company's charter, a document Cole had famously boasted of not reading, saying, "That's what I pay lawyers for." The clause stipulated that if a C-suite executive, specifically one holding a key founder designation, which only applied to Cole and Ava, were found to have engaged in conduct constituting moral turpitude, which included but was not limited to using company assets to facilitate an illicit relationship, or engaging in a relationship with a subordinate that compromises corporate integrity, then a very specific chain of events would be triggered. The offending party would be deemed to have breached their fiduciary duty to the company. This breach would automatically trigger a mandatory buyout provision of their controlling shares. But it wasn't a simple market value buyout. The clause stated that the non-offending key founder would have the primary and exclusive right to purchase all of the offending founder's voting shares for a predetermined price, the original par value from the company's first seed round of funding. For Cole's 40% stake in a company now worth billions, that price was a paltry $40,000. It was a nuclear option, a doomsday device Ava had built into the very DNA of their company. She had hoped she would never have to use it. She had created it not out of a premonition of infidelity, but from a pragmatic engineer's desire to protect the system she was building from its most unpredictable variable human behavior. Cole's ego was both his greatest asset and his greatest liability. Ava had simply coded a backstop for the liability. For the next few hours, Ava worked with methodical precision. She compiled the evidence, the credit card statement from Le Bernardin, the valet ticket from the Peninsula, New York, that contradicted his expense report for the Chicago trip, a screenshot of his phone's location data from that evening, and a calm, factual written affidavit of what she had witnessed in room 402 of the Greenwich Hotel. She also cross-referenced Cassandra Rowe's travel and expense reports, quickly finding a pattern of booking flights and hotels that mirrored Cole's on his solo business trips. It was a clean, irrefutable chain of evidence demonstrating a pattern of deceit and the misuse of company funds. When she was done, she didn't feel triumph. She felt a profound, aching sadness. The system had worked as designed. The bug had been identified. But it meant the core programming of her life was fundamentally corrupted and had to be purged. She had architected the perfect corporate coup, but in doing so, she had to acknowledge the utter failure of her marriage. She sent the encrypted file to Robert Chen at 4:37 a.m. Then for the first time that night, she closed her laptop, curled up on the hotel bed, and allowed herself a few moments to weep for the man she thought she had married and the partnership she thought they had built. The tears were brief and hot. When they stopped, only cold resolve remained. The architect had her blueprint. Now it was time to build. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. Monday morning. Cole, after a weekend of frantic unanswered calls and texts to Ava, arrived looking haggard but defiant. He had clearly convinced himself this was a domestic dispute that had foolishly spilled into the professional sphere. He saw it as an embarrassment to be managed afire, to be stamped out with his signature charm and a public relations strategy. He walked into the 80th floor boardroom, ready to apologize for his lapse in judgment and assure the board it would not affect the company's performance. He was not prepared for what awaited him. Ava was already there, seated at the head of the long mahogany table, a spot usually reserved for him. She was dressed in a charcoal grey suit, her posture impeccable, her face serene and unreadable. Beside her sat Robert Chen, his files laid out before him with surgical precision. The other 6 board members were seated, their expressions a mixture of confusion, concern, and apprehension. They had been summoned with no agenda, only a note citing a matter of urgent corporate governance. Cole faltered for a second, seeing Ava in his chair. "Ava, what is this? I think we should discuss this privately," he said, trying to project an air of calm authority. "We are long past a private discussion, Cole," Ava replied, her voice even and clear, carrying across the silent room. "Please take a seat." She gestured to an empty chair on the side. The power dynamic was immediately shockingly clear. He was no longer the host of this meeting. He was a guest. He hesitated, then, seeing the stony faces of the board, reluctantly sat down. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Ava began, her eyes scanning each board member. "I have called this meeting to address a grave breach of fiduciary duty by our CEO, Mr. Harrington, and to invoke a non-negotiable remedy as stipulated in our corporate charter." A murmur went through the room. George Findlay, a gruff old-school investor and the board's longest-serving member, scowled. "Ava, with all due respect, if this is about a personal matter." "It ceased to be a personal matter, George." Ava cut in, her tone sharp but respectful. "When Mr. Harrington began using company funds to conduct an affair with a subordinate, falsifying expense reports to cover his tracks and compromising the ethical integrity of this entire organization." Cole turned purple. "This is an outrageous slander. It's a private issue being twisted." "Robert," Ava said calmly, ignoring Cole's outburst. Robert Chen stood up. "Each of you has a tablet in front of you," he said, his voice dry and factual. "You will find a secured file containing evidence of Mr. Harrington's activities. This includes falsified expense reports, credit card statements showing non-business-related expenditures, and location data that directly contradicts his official company travel itinerary. You will also find a sworn affidavit from Mrs. Donovan." As the board members began swiping through the files, the atmosphere in the room turned arctic. Jaws tightened, eyes widened. George Findlay's scowl deepened into a look of profound disgust. "Furthermore," Robert continued, "these actions constitute a clear violation of Article 4, Section 8B of the Innovate Dynamics Founding Charter, which all of you ratified upon joining this board. The clause is titled Moral Turpitude and Fiduciary Integrity." He projected the clause onto the large screen at the end of the room. The dense legalese appeared in stark black and white. Robert walked the board through it, his words precise and devastating. He explained how Cole's actions had triggered the clause, and he laid out the unavoidable consequence. And as such, the non-offending key founder, Mrs. Ava Donovan, now holds the exclusive right to purchase Mr. Harrington's entire stake of 8 million voting shares for their original pair value of half a cent per share. The total purchase price is $40,000. The silence that followed was absolute. It was as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. The board members stared at the screen, then at Ava, then at Cole, who looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. "This is insane," Cole finally exploded, slamming his fist on the table. "You can't be serious." A vendetta clause. This is theft. I built this company. We built this company, Ava corrected him, her voice quiet but carrying immense weight. You were the face, Cole. I was the foundation. And I built the foundation to last with fail-safes to protect it from catastrophic failure. You signed the document. You agreed to the terms. Your personal behavior is the catastrophe. George Findlay looked at Robert Chen. Is this legally binding? It is ironclad, Robert stated. Drafted, signed, and ratified. The evidence of the breach is, in my professional opinion, indisputable. Ava slid a cashier's check across the table. It slid to a stop directly in front of Cole. It was made out to him in the amount of $40,000. This is your severance, Cole, Ava said. The transaction is effective immediately. As the new majority shareholder, my first act is to call a vote. I move to remove Cole Harrington as CEO and chairman of the board of Innovate Dynamics, effective immediately for cause. She looked around the table. All in favor. One by one, the hands went up. Some reluctantly, some with a grim sense of duty. George Findlay was the last, his eyes locking with Ava's, for a long moment before his hand rose decisively. It was unanimous. Cole Harrington, the charismatic titan of the tech world, sat staring at the check, his face a mask of disbelief and incandescent rage. He had walked into the room a billionaire CEO in command of his empire. He would walk out with nothing but 40,000 and the smouldering ruins of his life. Ava stood up, her expression unchanging. The second order of business, she announced to the stunned room, is to appoint an interim CEO. I nominate myself. We have a company to stabilize. The coup was complete. It was swift, brutal, and executed with devastating precision. The architect had not just evicted the tenant. She had reclaimed the entire building. The news of Cole Harrington's immediate resignation and Ava Donovan's appointment as interim CEO hit Innovate Dynamics like a shockwave. The official press release, carefully crafted by Robert Chen and a crisis PR team, was a masterpiece of corporate euphemism, citing personal reasons and a desire for Cole to pursue other opportunities. But within the glass walls of the company, the rumor mill churned at light speed. Cassandra Rowe was fired before the board meeting had even concluded. Her termination was handled swiftly and silently, by HR citing a gross violation of the company's code of conduct. She was escorted from the building with a small box of her personal effects, her meteoric rise ending in an abrupt and humiliating fall. She was a footnote in the larger drama, a casualty of a war she hadn't even known was being waged. Ava's first day as CEO was a trial by fire. She walked into the executive suite, a floor she had rarely visited, and found a staff accustomed to Cole's larger-than-life, charm-based leadership. They now faced a woman they barely knew, one they had mentally catalogued as the CEO's quiet wife. They saw her as a placeholder, a grieving spouse, thrust into a role she couldn't possibly handle. Her first meeting was with the senior leadership team. They sat around the conference table, their expressions guarded their body language skeptical. They were Cole's guys' men he had hired for their loyalty and salesmanship. I understand this is an abrupt transition, Ava began, her voice calm and measured. And I know many of you have questions. My priority right now is stability and continuity. Our clients, our products, and our employees are what matter. The mission of Innovate Dynamics has not changed. The VP of Sales, a slick, overconfident man named Mark Walton, leaned back in his chair. With all due respect, Ava Cole was the rainmaker. He had the relationships. Who's going to be the face of the company now? It was a direct challenge to her authority. The entire room waited to see how she would respond. "The face of the company will be its performance," Ava replied without missing a beat. "For too long, we've relied on one man's personality. From now on, we will rely on the strength of our product and the quality of our execution. Our numbers will speak for us. Our technology will be our brand." She then pivoted, demonstrating a level of operational knowledge that stunned them. "Mark your team's conversion rate in the Midwest has been lagging by 12% for 2 quarters. I believe it's due to a failure to properly demonstrate the Nexus 7 predictive analytics module." "Ben," she said, turning to the head of engineering, a man she had worked with for years, "I want you to assign 2 of your top systems analysts to Mark's team for the next month to provide deep-dive technical support on their sales calls." She went around the room addressing each department head with a similar incisive command of their metrics, challenges, and personnel. She knew their projects, their budgets, their sticking points. The VPs who had expected a soft, emotional speech were left scrambling to keep up. She wasn't talking about vision or synergy. She was talking about server uptime, API integration, and supply chain logistics. She was speaking the language of the machine she had built. The skepticism in the room slowly began to curdle into a grudging respect. This was not the woman they saw in society magazines. This was someone who knew the guts of the company better than they did. But the internal battle was only half the problem. The external one was just beginning. Cole, stripped of his power, but not his connections, was not going away quietly. He immediately began a whisper campaign against Ava. He called friendly journalists, influential investors, and former colleagues, painting himself as the victim of a vindictive, power-hungry wife who had used a legal technicality to steal his life's work. The narrative he spun was insidious and effective. Ava was an engineer, not a leader. A glorified coder who had no business running a multi-billion-dollar company. The market reacted with uncertainty. Innovate Dynamics stock, which had soared under Cole's charismatic leadership, wobbled, dropping % in the first 48 hours. George Findlay, the formidable board member, called her into his office at the end of her second day. The room was old-world wealth filled with dark wood and leather-bound books. "The street is nervous, Ava," he said, his voice a low rumble. "They see Cole as the visionary. They see you as an unknown quantity. This stunt you pulled in the boardroom was brilliant, I'll grant you that. But now you have to prove you can actually fly the plane." "I don't need to fly it, George," Ava replied, meeting his intense gaze without flinching. "I built the engine. I know how it works. Cole was just the pilot who liked to wave at the crowds from the cockpit." George studied her for a long moment, a flicker of something, perhaps respect, in his eyes. "The market doesn't care about who built the engine. It cares about quarterly earnings and forward guidance. You have 1 quarter, Ava. 1 quarter to stabilize the stock and prove that you are not just an interim solution. If you can't, the board will have no choice but to initiate a search for a permanent CEO." It was an ultimatum. A throne was one thing to seize, but another thing entirely to hold. The crown felt heavy on her head, and Ava knew that the people who had just watched her depose the king were now waiting to see if the new queen would stumble. The first few weeks were brutal. Cole's shadow loomed large over the company, and his campaign to undermine Ava was relentless and cunning. He knew the company's pressure points because he had helped create them. His first move was to poach 2 of Innovate Dynamics' top salespeople, luring them to a competitor with massive signing bonuses and promises of equity. The move was calculated to hit Ava where she was weakest client-facing relationships. He followed this by leaking a carefully selected out-of-context internal memo to a tech blog suggesting that Innovate Dynamics was planning to sunset a popular legacy product causing panic among a key segment of their customer base. The phone lines lit up. Ava's inbox was a raging inferno of concerned clients, anxious investors, and opportunistic competitors. The boardroom which she had commanded so decisively now felt like a lonely island in a sea of doubt. The senior VPs, while outwardly compliant, were hedging their bets, their loyalty still a flickering flame. Ava responded not with panic, but with process. She understood that a storm was not something you could fight head-on. It was something you had to navigate with precision and strength. She worked 18-hour days, fueled by coffee and a cold, burning determination to prove everyone wrong. Instead of trying to replicate Cole's charm offensive, she leaned into her own strengths, data transparency, and technical superiority. She personally called every single client affected by the leaked memo. She didn't offer platitudes or sales speak. She walked them through the product roadmap herself, explaining the technical reasons for the eventual migration and demonstrating the superior capabilities of the new system. She was candid, brilliant, and utterly convincing. She didn't sell them a dream. She gave them a blueprint. Several clients who had been on the verge of leaving ended up signing early adopter contracts for the new platform. Internally, she focused on shoring up her base. She knew she couldn't win over Cole's loyalists overnight. Instead, she focused on the heart of the company, the engineers, the developers, and the project managers. The people who, like her, had been working in the shadows for years. She spent hours every day, not in the executive suite, but down in the engineering pits. She held town halls with the coders, not in the formal auditorium, but in their break rooms, surrounded by whiteboards and empty pizza boxes. She didn't give speeches. She asked questions. What were their biggest frustrations? What bureaucratic hurdles were slowing them down? What tools did they need? Ben Carter, her longtime head of engineering, watched the transformation with quiet admiration. Cole would come down here once a quarter for a photo op, he told a group of senior developers. Ava comes down here to help us debug a kernel panic. She authorized a new budget for top-of-the-line development hardware, something the engineers had been requesting for years. But Cole had dismissed as an unnecessary expense. She streamlined the approval process for new projects, cutting through layers of red tape that had stifled innovation. She implemented a Founders Award, a significant cash bonus for any employee who developed a patentable innovation for the company. Morale, which had plummeted after Cole's ousting, began to climb. The engineers who had long felt undervalued now felt seen and empowered. They had a leader who spoke their language, who understood their work, and who respected their contributions. They began to work with a renewed sense of purpose, not for the stock price or the CEO, but for the product itself, and for the woman who had always been one of them. Cole's sabotage attempts continued. He used his connections to try and block a crucial supply chain deal for new server components. When Ava found out, she didn't try to go through the same channels. She dug into the technical specifications and found a smaller, more innovative supplier in Finland that could provide superior hardware at a 15% lower cost. She flew to Helsinki herself, met with their engineers, and closed the deal in 36 hours. She was fighting a guerrilla war against a ghost. Cole was attacking the company's reputation and relationships. Ava was fortifying its foundation, making it stronger, faster, and more efficient from the inside out. One night, working late in her new office, the same one where Cole used to entertain reporters, she looked out at the glittering city. She was exhausted, lonelier than she had ever been, and facing a battle that was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of clarity. The gilded cage was gone. The storm was raging, but she was at the helm of her own ship, navigating with her own map. And for the first time, she truly believed she could bring it safely to shore. The question was whether the board and the market would give her enough time to do it. For 2 months, Ava played defense. She stabilized the company, reassured clients, and bolstered internal morale. She had successfully weathered the storm. Now it was time to change the weather. She knew that to truly secure her position and the future of Innovate Dynamics, she couldn't just survive Cole's attacks. She had to definitively end them. Her counteroffensive began in the one place Cole would never expect: the company's financial archives. Cole had always viewed the accounting department as a boring necessity, a team of number crunchers who just processed his expense reports. Ava, however, saw it as a repository of data, a log file of the company's history. And like any good engineer, she knew that log files often contained evidence of critical errors. With a team of discreet forensic accountants, she initiated a full audit of the past 5 years of executive spending, focusing on a series of venture funds and shell corporations Cole had set up for strategic acquisitions. On the surface, they looked legitimate, but Ava, with her intimate knowledge of the company's operations, knew that several of these acquisitions had never been integrated into their tech stack. They were ghost assets. After weeks of painstaking work, tracing wire transfers and cross-referencing invoices, the accountants found the smoking gun. Cole had been using a subsidiary shell corporation, Harrington Ventures, to systematically siphon company funds. He would use Innovate Dynamics capital to invest in promising startups, only for those startups to then hire his personal consulting firm for exorbitant fees. He was essentially paying himself with company money, dressing it up as strategic investment. It was a sophisticated scheme, cleverly hidden behind layers of corporate jargon and legal entities. It wasn't just unethical. It was felony-grade embezzlement. Ava now held a weapon far more powerful than the morality clause. This wasn't about personal betrayal. This was a direct crime against the company and its shareholders. Her second line of attack was aimed at the market. She knew she needed a definitive win, a bold stroke that would silence the doubters and prove that Innovate Dynamics was not just surviving, but thriving under her leadership. She set her sights on a contract that Cole had been chasing for over a year and had spectacularly failed to land a complete logistics overhaul for Titan Retail, the largest e-commerce giant in the world. Cole had tried to win them over with lavish dinners, golf games, and grand promises. Ava read the technical briefs and realized the Titan team wasn't interested in charm. They were engineers with a massive, complex problem, so she approached them differently. She didn't ask for a meeting with their CEO. She requested a technical workshop with their chief technology officer and lead architects. She flew to their Seattle headquarters, not with a sales team, but with Ben Carter and 2 of her top developers. For 2 days, they didn't present a single PowerPoint slide. Instead, they whiteboarded. They dove deep into Titan's existing infrastructure, identifying bottlenecks and inefficiencies that Titan's own team hadn't seen. Then Ava unveiled her solution, not just a sale of their Nexus 7 software, but a proposal to create a bespoke, deeply integrated platform, Nexus Prime, built specifically for Titan's unique scale. It was an audacious, incredibly complex proposal that would require a massive commitment of resources. It was also brilliant. The Titan CTO, a woman known for her no-nonsense engineering-first approach, was visibly impressed. "No CEO has ever come in here and talked to me about kernel-level data processing," she said. "They just want to take my boss to dinner. You're offering a real solution." A week later, Innovate Dynamics was awarded the Titan Retail contract. It was the largest deal in the company's history, valued at over $500 million over 5 years. The news hit the financial world like a thunderclap. The day of the announcement, Innovate Dynamics stock didn't just stabilize. It soared, jumping 22% in a single day of trading, reaching an all-time high. The narrative instantly flipped. Ava Donovan was no longer the interim CEO or the jilted wife. She was the visionary leader who had landed the contract of the decade. The tech blogs that had questioned her ability were now running glowing profiles about her strategic genius. With the company's future secured and her reputation cemented, Ava made her final move. She called a private meeting with Cole and his lawyer. She didn't bring Robert Chen. She went alone. They met in a sterile conference room at a neutral law firm. Cole walked in with a familiar swagger, likely believing the soaring stock price gave him new leverage to negotiate a better exit package. Ava didn't waste time with pleasantries. She slid a single folder across the table. Inside was a summary of the forensic accountant's report detailing the embezzlement scheme from Harrington Ventures. Cole's face went white as he read it. The swagger vanished, replaced by the same raw panic she had seen in the hotel room. "The district attorney's office would be very interested in this," Ava said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Fraud embezzlement. That carries a mandatory prison sentence, Cole. And I doubt you'd enjoy the view from a cell as much as the one from the penthouse." She then slid a second document across the table. It was a settlement agreement. It stipulated that Cole would publicly release a statement praising her leadership and wishing the company well. He would sign an ironclad non-disclosure and non-compete agreement. In exchange for his full and immediate cooperation, the findings of the audit would remain sealed. "You have no more moves left, Cole," she said, her voice quiet but absolute. "This isn't a negotiation. It's the period at the end of the sentence. You can either be a disgraced, forgotten ex-CEO, or you can be a convicted felon. The choice is yours." He stared at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and defeat. He was looking at the woman he had dismissed, underestimated, and betrayed. And he finally saw her for who she was. The architect of his rise, and now the architect of his utter, complete ruin. Checkmate. The final severance agreement was signed. Cole Harrington vanished from the tech world as quickly as he had risen. His public statement was bland and complimentary, a final humiliating act of capitulation. He took a modest buyout for his few remaining non-controlling shares and retired to a life of obscurity, the ghost of his former glory. The whispers against Ava ceased, replaced by an awed respect in the corridors of Silicon Valley and Wall Street. 3 months after the boardroom coup, George Findlay called another board meeting. Ava walked in, expecting another grilling on quarterly projections. Instead, she found the board members standing, and as she entered, they began to applaud. George, his usual gruff expression replaced with a genuine smile, held up a glass. "To our CEO," he said, his voice booming in the quiet room, "who has not only weathered the storm, but has steered this company into a new era of prosperity and integrity. The board has voted unanimously. The interim tag is officially removed. Congratulations, Madam CEO." Ava felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling that was more satisfying than any stock price or news headline. It was the feeling of earned respect. In the months that followed, Innovate Dynamics was transformed. The culture shifted from one driven by personality and salesmanship to one driven by innovation, collaboration, and excellence. Ava promoted from within, elevating talented engineers and managers who had been overlooked in the previous regime. Ben Carter became her chief technology officer, her trusted right hand. The company became known not just for its profits, but as one of the best places to work in the tech industry. The penthouse on the 72nd floor was sold. Ava moved into a chic modern apartment downtown, a space that was entirely her own, filled with books, art, and technology. Her home office was no longer a sanctuary from a hollow life. It was a command center for a fulfilling one. One evening, nearly a year after that fateful night at the Greenwich Hotel, Ava stood at the window of her new office, the one she had earned looking out at the city lights. The view was just as spectacular, but it felt different. She wasn't looking down on a world conquered by someone else, a world she had helped build in secret. She was looking out at her city, her company, her future. She had lost a husband, a marriage, and the life she thought she knew. But in the wreckage, she had not found ruin. She had found herself. She had reclaimed her name, her work, and her power. She was no longer the silent partner, the woman behind the man. She was Ava Donovan, the CEO of Innovate Dynamics, and she was just getting started. The architect was finally living in the cathedral she had built. Ava Donovan's story is a powerful reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. She transformed the deepest personal betrayal into a catalyst for an incredible professional triumph. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully hers and proving that true leadership isn't about charm or charisma, but about competence, integrity, and unwavering strength. Her journey from the shadows to the CEO's chair shows that the best laid plans are the ones you make for yourself long before you ever need them. If her story of resilience and strategic brilliance resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own hidden strength. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more real-life stories of incredible triumphs and dramatic twists. What part of Ava's story impressed you the most? Let us know in the comments below.